A warm welcome to the fourth session of Larnaca-Conferences on this lovely Sunday. And yes, a warm welcome to the audience out there in the world and our panelists here in this Zoom session. And today it's about mass migration and social identity conflicts. My name is Hans, and together with Rebekka, we will guide you through the rest of the setup process. Rebekka, since I am even new to Larnaca, could you just tell me what it is?
Absolutely. Thank you, Hans. So the Larnaca-Conferences have been established in 2018. And the idea behind this to focus on the hot topics of our age. And actually, the conferences are taking place each year, but it's not a single event thing. So we are not only meeting in November each year, and then there is nothing happening in between. But actually, there are many other interactions like publications and discussions taking place during the year as well. So the Larnaca-Conferences actually are supposed to function as a part of a so-called social sculpture. And the social sculpture is a human activity that strives to structure and shape society or the environment. And this particular social sculpture, the Larnaca-Conferences, has already begun to form and will grow over the next years, also through other means than these meetings in the conferences. And we are actually currently part of creating a new part of society, which is pretty cool. So to quote Gitta, what we need is human superintelligence. And here we are actually starting to gather it together.
Thank you. And new to Larnaca, but for this session, we just prepared a small guidance. What comes next? As we all have received an email and hopefully visited or did the keynote prior to the session on YouTube, we are now in the panel where we are going to asking the panelists to share their points regarding the keynote and promote their breakout sessions. This is now live here in the YouTube stream. Parallel to that, we have the audience chat where our facilitators guiding the audience through the chat. And after this panel, we will go to the backstage rooms to have a deeper discussion with the backstage audience. This will be 2 times for about 50 minutes. And between that, if we have some time to have a break, there could be also a gathering in the Wonder Me space where you all can meet. And if you're curious about who is in the panel, who is on this conference, there's as well a Padlet where everybody could place his small profile in there. And collecting all this together, later on we will have a review from the fruits and the findings of this conference session at the Karlauer Verlag. This in a short How to Larnaca. And I think
maybe a point to add, if I may, is that we are also using a hashtag, which is Larnaca-Conferences with an S at the end.
Important.
So, absolutely. You are absolutely welcome to post on social media like LinkedIn, Twitter, also Instagram, hashtag Larnaca-Conferences, and interact with us and with other participants as well to also foster the forming of this social sculpture.
Yeah. Be invited to Twitter if you have time. And the next tip for this conference is please take notes if you want to, because it will be fast and a structured mind goes better with that. This is a tip for the breakout sessions with the panelists later, that we can form our questions better. But I wonder, who is with us in the conference here? Who are our panelists? Rebekka, do you want to start with Thomas?
Absolutely. Thanks, Hans. So first of all, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Thomas or Tom Henry from the United States. Tom is a change agent who is today contributing his energy at Travis Credit Union, building learning organizations that serve members, employees, and leaders in their personal and professional environments. And what I found very impressive is that Tom's career spans 4 decades in all different kinds of areas: department stores, grocery, and now financial services. And working in leadership and executive development, he has led teams and organizations through mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcies, natural disasters, economic collapses, and their recovery. Tom has shared a fun fact with us, which actually is that, interestingly, he is the 5th child in a family of 6 children. And it actually means that Tom was born into a group identity and naturally sees himself as connected to something larger than just himself. And we assume that also helped him to shape his ongoing goal towards fostering servant leadership in our independent global communities. Next one we have to introduce, or we are allowed to introduce, is Tamara.
Tamara is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and producer concerning ESG communications. And currently she's a co-founder and chief marketing officer for System Changer. That's a name, a community think tank for ethical systems change. I think all the links perhaps we can state in the Padlet or later on in the panel, in the breakout discussions. But as a fun fact, as an adventurist, she loves to try new things. And I think, so be prepared for a rock climbing, NASCAR racing and skydiving challenge with her. And also it's a pleasure to welcome Dickson David Ntwiga, a native of Kenya and well-known for community development and humanitarian work. And as you can see in his biography, he is a president, a founder, a director, an award holder, but summarized for me, an ambassador for refugees and human rights, and overall a connector of people. To both of you, welcome, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here. Thanks a lot.
So then it's my pleasure, of course, to introduce Gitta to you as every time, and I enjoy this, but this time, Gitta, a little bit shorter than usual, because people can find your introduction also on the Padlet. So Gitta is an economist and founder and director of the FORMWELT Institute, initiator of the Larnaca-Conferences, co-inventor of FORMWELT and Weltform, and a systems researcher and cyberneticist. And Gitta's fun fact actually is that she loves marzipan and swimming, and she can talk for hours about language, clarity, and complexity management until all listeners thinking marbles are smoking properly from all the spinning. And I can absolutely confirm that conversations and discussions with Gitta are always great thinking helpers for every one of us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rebekka.
Very good. With this, we have introduced everyone to you. Now it's time to look at the keynote.
Yeah.
Right.
Rebekka, could you just make a short intro to the keynote, to the what you have thought out?
Absolutely. So we all had the pleasure to have access to the keynote by Dickson beforehand, and it was great to watch it and to get introduced to your thoughts here as well during your interview with Gitta. Absolutely enjoyed it. So what I took away from the keynote as quite important is that you stated that actually not to let people move aimlessly. We have to learn to manage migration so that it can be beneficial for all of us, for the migrants, as well as the countries or the people in the countries they are actually going to. We are in this together. And that means that the moral aspect of human rights is important as well. When others suffer, we should feel their pain, because people do not leave their homes without a reason, but mostly because it has become unbearable for them to live there. And when your life is in danger, you run. I thought that was an important quote from the keynote. And actually, the wealthier world has dissociated from the suffering of other humans, which allows the wrong in migration crisis and human rights violations to continue. So the plea by Dickson was to return to the moral aspects of the human rights. Let's live compassion and let's connect back to being humans. With that, I would like to hand it over to our panelists to also share their thoughts, comments, and ideas on the keynote, as well as maybe also give a little hint at what they are planning to do or talk about in their breakout sessions, so that also the people who are joining us later on will have an idea what they are signing up for. And we would like to go once again in the alphabetic order. So we will first ask Henry and then Tamara to join with us, and then we'll Gitta, and then we will hand it back to Dickson in the end to also share his comments on what he has heard from you today. With that, I would like to hand over to Tom to start the conversation.
All right, well, thank you so much, Rebekka. Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Gitta, for bringing this dialogue together. And thank you, all of you. Thank you, Tamara, for showing. Thank you, participants, for actually being here. You know, we have a film director in the United States, internationally known, most of you know him, named Woody Allen, and he has said that 90% of success is just showing up. So thank you all for showing up today. But now that last 10% is really difficult. It's like that last 10 pounds that we need to take off when we're on a diet, and they are the most difficult. So with that, my response, and thank you so much again, Dickson, first. What not only an inspirational, but a very moving and powerful presentation. But we seem to have these complex and difficult challenges that will require us to address some real fundamental issues here. Of course, the first one, human rights, but then equity. Huge problem we have in the world today, equity. The inequities in the world today are probably as large as they've ever been, and they're even more intense because now everything is scalable across time, across space, and we are very much already, whether we know it or not, we are an interconnected community. We also have this challenge of how do we raise consciousness on this planet, because we cannot fix this problem right now with what we are doing in terms of how we are showing up. So let's start with that first issue. For me, I see this challenge as fundamentally, who do we see ourselves as humans? And I heard that in the presentation with Dickson. Are we these personalities? Are we these egos? Are we our thoughts? Are we these social identities? Or are we actually something greater than this? Are we these physical conscious beings? Or are we indeed something larger, this interconnected consciousness? And if we are, what does that mean? So in short, are we these egos? Are we these thoughts? Are we conscious beings that are a connected consciousness? Who are we? I think fundamentally that is our challenge. We've forgotten who we are, and we forgot how we got here. We seem to think we have no responsibility to each other. And we also have forgotten our responsibility to the life force on this planet, and frankly, throughout the universe now as we extend into space, even in commercial ways. We cannot solve this problem at the level of consciousness that created it. I believe we all are familiar with Albert Einstein. We must transform as individuals. We must do what we can to provide an environment where more individuals are able to actualize. We need to have individuals transform beyond our self-centered needs. Our values and our fears are what hold us back. We do not see clearly, and we do not act holistically. Humans naturally seek actualization. You know, ultimately, we all learned this through Maslow. This is our journey to fulfill those basic needs, but more importantly, our growth needs. I simplify it by saying it's a journey from me to we. We are born, and at about 18 months old, we finally recognize that we're a separate identity. And that's where it all begins. But our ultimate journey is always back to we. We cannot fully actualize without actualizing a higher power. Not just to be something beyond ourselves, but to be part of an integral whole, where we actualize as connected beings, and we then can fulfill both our basic and our growth needs. We need leaders. We need leaders who have transformed, leaders who have transformed beyond their self-centered heroes' journeys to authentic servant leadership. This can only be done when leaders see themselves as connected to an entire whole consciousness. We have lost our way, and we now have ended up with leaders that not only have lost their way, but they end up exploiting the very people and systems that they were assigned to serve. So what gets in the way? As Gitta mentioned, we're not going to be able to achieve this super intelligence if we're bogged down with fear-driven energy. Fear arises when an excessive focus is on our basic needs. We cannot fill our basic needs. We cannot fulfill our growth needs. And it's fear of not meeting those basic needs that creates that excessive focus. It pushes us out of the ever-present moment into our past and into a dystopian future that we all fear. It's often at the cost of neglecting each other. So how does this affect me? How does this affect my role? How does this affect you? How does it affect your role in helping humanity face these fears? I would like to summarize my points here by quoting Thich Nhat Hanh. We know Thich Nhat Hanh, Nobel Peace Prize winner, nominated by Martin Luther King. And he has this lovely quote. He says, when we see truth, we suffer. If we do not suffer, we see nothing. As Dickson stated, Western countries must be able to see this. We must be able to see the truth if we're going to be able to help these people. In our current situation, we don't see them as having the ability or even the willingness to take on this work. We don't see this. To face this challenge, I'd like to summarize in the form of 2 questions that we could have in dialogue. First one, have we forgotten who we are? Who are we as humans? And the second question, how does knowing who I am as a human affect my role in facing these crises? Thank you so much for including me today.
Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing that with us. And also thank you for your agility to jump in whilst we have been ignoring the alphabet here. So I would like to hand over to Tamara to also share her ideas and thoughts with us.
That was beautifully articulated. And I thank you everyone for having me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this and a part of the thinking that goes along with this. Dickson, your keynote was wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to it and thinking, and it kept sparking new ideas throughout while you were talking. And so I want to just point out a few that stuck with me while I was listening. And it was kind of bullet pointed. It was values, communication, human trafficking and migration, and managing migration, like was mentioned earlier. But then as I started to think about it more, and I started thinking about it in kind of a systems context, I started thinking about communication with purpose in a way that motivates people to act in accordance with your values, and how that really boils down to trust in institutions, trust in yourself, trust that what you're doing can actually serve a purpose. And sorry. And communicating with purpose is actually something that I think about every day, multiple times a day. How do we communicate in a way, an authentic way that actually initiates people to take action, initiates people to care about others, makes people care about world events, without causing people to get so overwhelmed that they don't take action. And on a daily basis, I also think about what is it that's happening in the world that is not being paid attention to, that's critical. And so Dickson's work is absolutely phenomenal on the ground. And I think, how often do I hear these stories that allow me to take action, allow me to do something? Is there a call to action? And I would say, over a perspective from the US, is not often enough. The communication on important issues, it doesn't happen enough. And I think that we need definitely more of it. But then when I think about migration and critical issues like that, I think I hear of these stories, in passing. And so how do we bring these stories to light, in a way that people can care about them empathetically. We talk about migration and critical crisis. I think of what's happening with the Nile River, but in the US, we can look at what's happening with the Colorado River, with the water rights, and that these critical issues are not getting enough attention. And Dickson, you spoke about Afghanistan, and it kind of sent me into a tangent to the side of, the famine in Afghanistan is a singular problem that has all of these different systemic issues that go into it. And it's only until you bring all of those pictures together that you can create a holistic problem. And so not only is it the issue of getting access to food, but it's also the banking institutions, the internet, and the trust in institutions that is a complete failing that has then led to a critical issue that's leading to death. And so how do we communicate to the larger people? How can they address these systems issues, not just one holistic problem? Because you can bring aid to Afghanistan, but if it doesn't get into the hands of people, well, then you're, not serving your purpose. And so those were my key thoughts on Dickson's note. But again, it raised so many questions and so many ideas in my head that, I'm excited to chat about it, especially the communicating with purpose.
Thanks a lot. Very interesting. Gitta, would you be our next one?
Thank you, Hans. When I did the keynote interview with you, Dickson, my first thought was to provide a systemic factual counterpart to demonstrate scientifically with some system theory the background of mass migration. Then came betrayals of trust by influential people, and then came the UN climate conference in Glasgow, and I thought to myself, to hell with it. Is this all a systemic problem? Yes, definitely. Does that mean it has nothing to do with us? Absolutely not. Let me be a little bit naive, but to the point. If your neighbor rings your doorbell because his house burned down and he does not know where to go, what do? You let him in so he can be warm and safe at night, right? And if you see that an acquaintance suffers damage because of you, maybe even gets robbed and persecuted, what do you do then? You go and help him. That's what you do. Let us get to the heart of the whole damn problem of mass migration. Is it related to drought and famine? Sure it is. Do dictators and totalitarian regimes always play an important role in this? Yep. Can first world countries do anything about it? Sure they can. Do they? More likely on paper, only on paper. We all know that the money we collect here in rich countries for so-called developing countries, by the way, a quite arrogant and racist expression, isn't it? Almost never arrives where it is most urgently needed. We all have been watching the United Nations and its paper bearers for decades, how they protect the global players and the oil industry again and again. We here in Germany know politically neither the automotive industry nor the food industry will get their comeuppance. Instead, they prefer to point the finger at the end consumer, and the bogus justification will always be jobs. The same United Nations tell us that in 2050, we will most likely have to deal with 140 million climate refugees in addition to the refugees for the usual reasons. For example, the Federal Republic of Germany currently has about 83 million inhabitants. Let me say the uncomfortable thing here. Prosperity obligates us to have fellow human responsibility. This is especially true when this prosperity is acquired on the backs of the world's poorest. Since 1999, we have seen a worldwide decline in absolute poverty, which is good, but at the same time, the number of refugees is rising again. At the end of 2020, the number of people fleeing persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights abuses worldwide was 82.4 million. Today, it is 84 million living human beings, children included. But what can we do? We know that the United Nations will do nothing. They will continue to protect capital. We cannot rely on our politicians either. In the end, the tail always wags the dog there too. The Fridays for Future movement has at least created awareness and a questionable useful place at the bargaining table. It is a civil rights movement that will need a lot more mass until something finally moves. It will only get such mass through two things outside of its own involvement, namely that responsible business leaders and politicians finally take the side of the global population and of a future worth living in, which is not very likely to happen, and that we ensure that people in rich countries learn to think and act more responsibly. FORMWELT and the Larnaca-Conferences are definitely two important measures because both have a unifying effect. Without experience, knowledge remains hollow. And without prohibitive rules, people in first world countries will continue to try and plug those holes in their midst, whichever cheaper consumer products, and unless they come into contact, and here is the point, with people from other countries who can tell them about their crisis experiences. Let us not imagine that it's all about helping. That would be a truly colonialist perspective. The helper as the savior of those whose misfortune he helped cause in the first place, that is cheap. It is about togetherness. We know from medical sociology, for example, that people in less prosperous countries often better cope with some diseases because their social systems still work. Many who come to us as refugees show us directly how humanity and helpfulness work for them, and they bring knowledge from their cultures that we need to cope with major crises. Integration is a social process that involves all sides. Isolationist thinking, as it is again appearing everywhere in Germany and in the whole world, has no future. We know from formological research on complex living systems that systems which try to re-entry themselves without further internal differentiation, which means those who try to stay what and who they are, lose their ability to decide. In the end, they perish. The past also shows this. Wars arise from isolationism. Those who try to identify with themselves without considering changing will sooner or later perish. This applies to people as well as to organizations and societies. Social identification conflicts are always conflicts on a dysfunctional conservative level. Those who think constructively are ready to change and can more easily cooperate with others. Readiness for cooperation depends on many things. One is chance to enter real dialogue, to get access to crisis experience. So what we have to do, in addition to direct involvement and putting pressure on politicians and global players, is to enter into real dialogues and to help others to enter into real dialogues. Let us talk with refugees here in our country. Let them teach us, and let us make sure that cross-cultural deep contacts can happen on a global scale. Let us ensure that personal experience can be made, because experience alone is the lasting teacher. This is how we bring mass behind the idea of a global community of people who are there for each other. Let us now not allow capital and politics any longer to drive a wedge of ignorance between us. So my ideas for breakout session, let us talk about how we can bring people together locally and globally. In doing so, we take into account how isolationist and nationalist thinking creates social identification conflicts that prevent us globally from preventing the catastrophes that are hurtling toward us right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitta. Now we're heading to Dickson, and I have to share you want your presentation now, or do you want to have some words on the panel?
Yes, I just need the quotes, the first quote, because what I feel listening to all of you, first, thank you for your kind words. I think we all agree that we need each other. That's all I hear from all of you. And I think this is, I really thank Gitta for that social sculpture, you know, I mean, it's a notion that it's a concept that very soon is going to be a reality. And because this is what we need. Because sometimes when I look at what's going on around the world, I can't help but think, are we gonna perish? Just as you used that word, are we gonna perish? But you know, we have a choice. And the choice is we unite. So if we can unite, you can be sure we've got all we need to address the problems that we have. So I just wanted us first to the first quote. It's one of my favorite quotes. You can put it up, Hans. Go down, the first quote. Yeah, that one. Now, you know, this guy, you know, going through hell can really help you see heaven, you know. I don't know whether you got me, but I said going through hell can help you see heaven. This is Nelson Mandela. This guy went through quite a lot. And I think it's during those moments of very difficult, those difficult moments that when one is able to see the whole. And so one time he said, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. And you know, when I look at what's going on today, I can't agree more. Like now, I was just looking at the crisis that is happening between the border between Belarus and Poland. We have people stuck there. And what's going on there, we can't even talk about human rights. So then, are those people, are they people? Are we talking about people? Or we are talking about some other kind of, you know, living things, you know? So that's something I really I would like us to focus on this. And then the last one, the last slide, that's the one that I want also to now there are some questions that I have, but I would want us to look at, you see, when we look at what's going on, when we talk about mass migration, how can we really help manage, as I had mentioned? You know, humanity, again, we are not here because, I mean, we talk about human rights and we debate about human rights. Like, I could not believe during the COP26, leaders, they spent their time negotiating. My goodness, they are negotiating and they have no choice. You know, I could not believe we were just negotiating whether to protect the environment or not. There's no choice. Whatever they came up with does not, I mean, Mother Nature does not care. You know, Mother Nature is there. So Mother Nature does not negotiate. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I can say that I'm very disappointed about the outcome of the COP26. And I'm saying this because this will keep people fleeing their countries.
Yes.
People will have to move. And I can tell you, we might have even wars because of this. And so that's why I actually had a question that I would want us maybe to take during the breakup sessions. You see, when the United Nations came into being in 1995, it was because they didn't want wars they wanted to put an end to future wars. But now, when I look at what's going on, mass migration is really challenging that, because we are going to have wars without even knowing it. Practically, I don't know whether you've looked at what's going on at because of the incident that I just talked about, the refugees who were stuck between Poland and Belarus. You can see there's almost, I don't know whether you've been following what's going on, but already there's a conflict brewing. I mean, so what does this tell us? Should we, at this point, maybe be clear that, mass migration, or climate change is actually a threat to international peace and security? I would like you to ponder that. Because you see, people cannot see it now, but I can tell you it is. It is. So we need to act now. Yeah. So thank you, guys. And thank you, Tamara. You spoke about communication. That's very important if we are to really make headway. And communication on purpose. And I was just thinking about, how our very being or our cultural affiliations even shape the debate of people communicating. You are a journalist. I can tell you, I've been watching news, and sometimes I wonder, why are they not reporting about this country? I find myself asking myself, come on, it's life and death, but you don't find that news anywhere. So even you guys, as journalists, I think you need to pull up your socks and you need to challenge yourselves and your colleagues and tell them, hey, we need to do better. So Tom, thank you very much. I really I don't know what to say, but you hit the nail on the head. I think there's a lot that we need to do as a global village, but are we really willing for this global village to take shape? That's the big question. Are we willing? Do we accept it? So I really agree. That is where we need to begin. And of course, it begins by all of us seeing ourselves as fellow human beings and having the answers to the many questions that we need to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dickson. You mentioned the refugees at Poland's border, and since you talked about journalism today, I read of a German right-wing journalist who was talking about these refugees as people who have chosen to be there, who have put many dollars into being there, and that this is all a scam, and totally ignoring the children right now there who are actually eating twigs to being there, and that is. No, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you also, Gitta, for the reaction here. And I think it's a great moment to welcome to further people on the panel here as well. First of all, very quickly, Barbara has also joined us, Barbara Zuber. She will be facilitating the breakout session with Gitta and Tom Henry. And then I would like to welcome Mark Damon Harvey, who is a diversity and anti-prejudice expert from Switzerland. And Mark has been our online expert, actually. So he has been in the chat that is running in parallel whilst we are streaming the panel here, interacting with our participants here. And we would like to invite Mark to also share a bit of the insights, maybe the discussion that was there on the chat, and especially if there are any blind spots that this panel could have missed so far, any further or additional thoughts you would like to add here. And the others, please also then feel free to react to what you are hearing. Mark, may I hand it to you? But we cannot hear you.
Hand it to you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
We cannot hear you.
Oops.
Where? Who else can? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, there's a very long delay. Where? Who
You
else?
need to close the stream window.
Oh, there's a very long delay. Where?
Mark, you have to close the window with the stream from YouTube. And then unmute yourself again. Yeah, just now. Open your microphone. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
That's perfect.
Just
now. Open your microphone. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
No.
It's coming in.
Perfect. Just now.
So perhaps we should start a chat with Mike, that we don't hear his audio.
No. It's coming in.
So perhaps we should start a chat with Mike.
Okay. Mark, you need to close the browser window with the YouTube stream. Otherwise, we will always hear this double what we are talking about.
Perhaps Servan may join and talk about the chat.
Can
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's no more echo or latency now.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
There's a horrible latency on it before I could hear everything I said 2 minutes later. Okay. What I looked at as far as the chat was concerned was, of course, the idea that we should be looking for possibilities to connect with each other and work as one. Also, getting to we would be the goal. I also wanted to say that I was very impressed by Dickson's extensive experience. I'm always impressed by people that are hands-on and not sitting somewhere in an office in New York and telling people what's needed. So that was for me a great point of orientation. What I noticed instantly that there is a tendency to generalize and speak about we when the out cultures are still struggling for recognition. And that is something that the reference culture, that means in the West or the North, is constantly emphasizing that we have to get to we. And the people that are outside of that culture, they don't know what we should be because they don't see where their place is in the whole thing. So it's kind of like the reference culture wants to skip a step and say, okay, this is what happened in the past. We were responsible for it. We didn't invite you to help us do it. Otherwise, it would have come out differently. And now we have a solution for the whole thing, and we're not inviting you here either. So it's really important to realize that that step has to be made, that there will be some conflict between the out cultures and the reference culture as far as recognition is concerned, and that it means that the reference culture has to back off of its own knowledge production, which it uses to interpret the world in general. And I think without that conflict, without going through that conflict, we can't get to we yet.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Inviting further reactions in as well from our other panelists. If you would like to open your microphones, maybe have a short conversation around what you just heard, please feel free.
Tom and Tamara, something to add? Or
I'm still trying to synthesize it all because I agree. I agree completely. And when trying to think about, tackling large issues like this, because this, when we've discussed migration and crisis in connection with climate change, there are so many issues that go into this, and globally everything is diverse, right? From America, when we're looking at this, it is a completely different issue to tackle than it is in Africa and Europe and Asia, wherever we're looking at. Not only is the climate issue different, but the institutions are different, the politics are different, the ability to tackle it from different angles is different, right? And so we're talking about something that's so major. And if we do want to get to a point of action and a point where it's like, okay, well, what can we work towards in order to start solving this, right? Mark, I think you're completely right when it comes to the we, right? Who is making these decisions and how does it impact others, and how are we leaving, key decision makers out, key stakeholders out of this decision. I think that is a huge problem. And that then also boils down to, we're looking at it from one lens. So if we're looking at it from the UN or, the United States or Europe trying to solve these problems, we're looking at it from one lens and trying to trickle it down into other situations, and that won't work. So how do we start developing solutions that incorporate stakeholders and their specific issues that they need tackled? And the conflict and the root problem could look totally different in each area. I mean, we look at, I think it was in Sudan for a while. I was looking at and talking with people about, the cattle wars that were happening, and it had to do with climate. It was because there, different people were losing their cattle because they were dying off because of climate change. But then there was cattle wars over that. Right. And maybe that's not what you think of as a climate crisis or a climate conflict, but it is. And so we do need to start changing our perspective, our lens of what is climate related conflict, crisis, and reasons for migration, and then talking to those stakeholders to solve it. I don't have any solutions at the moment, like after listening to this, I've just gone, oh my gosh, we have so much to do, so much to discuss. But that's kind of like synthesizing what I've heard, how I feel about it after listening. And, I want to make a point, Dickson, because you are 100% right. When I talk about, I think about every day how to communicate critical issues to catalyze action. How do I catalyze action? How do I catalyze action? And as a reporter, you're 100% right that reporters could do more, but I haven't met a reporter who isn't rolling up their sleeves and trying to do everything they can. And the institution keeps them from doing what they can. Because until there's the platform that allows them to keep going, to keep pushing, to keep reporting these stories, the institution tells them, okay, you've done 2 stories. Now look at this.
Send them to us.
Yeah.
We will publish them.
Yep. The publisher, the platform, so I think like that's where we talk about these systems that need to change. And we've got our work to do.
It's
Thank you.
gonna be an interesting breakout session.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to jump back into just very briefly, particularly on the importance of dialogue. You know, in the work that I do in change management and also in transformational change, we really look at as a premise that all dialogue and all transformation occurs through dialogue. If you do not have dialogue, there is no transformation. And this is a challenge that we have, and it also hits at what Mark is hitting at here. Who are these outsiders per se? Who are they dialoguing with? How can there be a change if there is no dialogue with the very people that you're trying to help? You must have a dialogue, and not a dialogue as if I'm coming to help, a dialogue as if I'm in this with you. Now, here's something really beautiful that happens in transformation. The change doesn't occur when I share my view. It's not when I'm sharing my view, although that's a very important part. We need to be able to articulate clearly our perspective so others can see it. They can get to the essence of the truth of it. But the real change happens when I am in dialogue with another. And when I hear my story coming out of their mouth, there is this beautiful gestalt where I not only see that we are connected, we indeed are so connected because I see you as me in that moment. And it doesn't matter whether it's 2 people or 2,000 or 2 billion people. When this happens, real change occurs. But dialogue is the absolute necessity for this to happen.
Yeah, may I, or did someone else want to say something? Okay, yeah, it's hard to have a dialogue if people aren't at the table.
Yes.
And that's the problem I've noticed in several different conferences, that sometimes people are invited, not as often as it should be, but it tends to kind of devolve what they've come to offer into something that's close to folklorism or shiny, colorful feathers. And that is, I noticed that also with project management, that projects need to be started by indigenous people, for instance, with the money coming from donor countries, and not asked at the latest phase of the project what they think about it. Participative efforts need to be participative at the beginning and not just at the end. Often you can assume that it's going to take longer to do it. Because there's more conversation going on between the stakeholders, and there's more of a conflict between the people that are participating with the larger organizations and as far as the content is actually concerned. But then the strategy probably is better to scale the project down.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And my experience is, if you start with participatory events and really engage in heterogenic discussions and dialogue, you will get less support. It's an interesting phenomenon that especially rich people and rich organizations are not very interested in stuff like that. They want to have their experts sitting there telling what everybody already knows, then everybody leaves the conference, and that's that.
That's why we are doing Larnaca-Conferences, to bring experts. Wonderful experts with the audience together, and due to we are in time, so much in time. There are 5 minutes left. But I think we should use this time because it's on Zoom, it's digital. We are all sitting in front of a quadrat. And let us have a break of 10 minutes, of course, and regenerate. Looking on the notes. And perhaps thinking about the chat, if there are some inputs which we can take into the breakout sessions, and see us in the breakout sessions in those rooms. 5:10. But Rebekka.
Yes, 5:10. And before we go there and we lead you to your well-deserved breaks, it's maybe a great moment to also introduce to you Sören Kluge, who has just joined us here as well. Sören is also part of our Larnaca-Conferences team, and he's the one taking care today of the chat moderation. Thank you, Sören, for being with us as well. Absolutely appreciate it. And then after the break, we will start with the breakout session. So Barbara, who you also see here and who we also introduced already, will be together with Gitta and Tom, and Hans and myself will be following Dickson and Tamara into the breakout session. Gitta, a comment here.
Yes, a question. And we will all meet here in the end again to talk about the experience we have had in the breakout sessions and hear a little bit more from the chat. Yeah, this is something new. We did not do that the last conferences, but I think it's a very, very good idea to come together in the end again and listen to what we have learned. Thank you so much for your participation, and I'm excited to see you, Tom, again in 10 minutes in the breakout session.
Yes, and that also means goodbye to the YouTube stream. Thank you also for following us along, and we are looking forward now to working behind the scenes with our participants and our panelists. Thanks for joining, and I'm heading back to Hans for the last goodbye.
The last goodbye is use the hashtag Larnaca-Conferences, use them on Twitter, on LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever social media you use, and Twitter about it. There are some other topics coming up in the next weekend, and see you soon and have a nice Sunday.